Welcome to Con Carne. I'm James Van Osdell, and Con Carne is presented by Alex Ross Art. Visit Alex Ross on YouTube at the Alex Ross Art so you can keep up to date with one of the comics industry's most prolific and awesome creators. Literally one of the best of all time. Here's Alex Ross to tell you more.
Hi, this is Alex Ross. I appreciate you guys supporting our YouTube, and we create new content every week. I hope you will continue to support us, and please subscribe.
It's Con Carne. Let's eat in the car. It's Con Carne. And now here's the star of our show, James Van Osdell.
Con Carne also sponsored by Easy Automation. Safety and security are things that you and I both want, need, and expect. What if you could always come home to a well-lighted house knowing that you and everyone else inside were safe? Or know that that package you've been waiting on, that thing you delivered, was delivered and secured. Embrace the future of smart living. Empower your home with intuitive control. Call my guy Dan. Seriously, you call this number, my guy Dan picks up. Call Dan at Easy Automation for a free, no-hassle quote, 630-730-3728, 630-730-3728, or visit easy-automation.net. So as of when I'm recording this, January 30th, 2024, I'm pretty sure that tomorrow it will be announced that this podcast, Con Carne, this vast empire you see in front of you, will be part of the Q101 Podcast Network, a subset of the Cumulus Podcast Network. For those who've known me for more than a few years, you probably know that I started my media career at Chicago radio station Q101 way back when. I worked at the station cumulatively more than 10 years. I wrote a book about Q101. We appreciate your enthusiasm. It's a big part of who I am. In fact, everything I've done since Q101, conversations always go back to that radio station and my time and my experiences there. It's a big part of the Chicago community, the pop cultural fabric of Chicago. And now that they've got this podcast network, it's a thrill to be back in the fold, back home, kind of, back at Q101. It just makes sense for Con Carne to be part of Q101, part of their podcast network. And that's the plan moving forward. Sure, you can get this podcast in all the usual places, everywhere you've heard it and seen it for the past 10 years, but also Q101.com, which is pretty cool to say. So there will be upcoming things I'll be doing in partnership with Q101, which, again, it's a thrill for me. It's such a part of who I am, and it's a part of where this podcast is going. So excited to be part of the Q101 Podcast Network, excited that you could be here to watch or hear it all happen. And with that, I'm going to run inside to the restaurant for tonight. I'm going to grab food, and the next thing you see me do is interview my guests and eat pizza. Saturday, February 3rd, Smashed Plastic celebrates its 5th anniversary of pressing vinyl in Chicago in an event in Ukrainian Village with Fax, former Con Carne guest, also Dianoga and Blood Hype. In the car, returning guests, Andy and Steve from Smashed Plastic. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
We're outside Rosati's Pizza at Addison and Western in Chicago. I can see the grease. Like, Andy, you're in such a precarious position trying to eat that without making a mess.
I'm all good.
Because you know those grease stains, like you can never get them out.
Oh, yeah, but I don't care about my clothes, so I'm all right.
Because you're too busy. You're working 15 hours a day at the record pressing facility. Who has time to worry about fashion?
Yeah, we get enough gunk on ourselves from at the plant,
So 5 years in business. We're celebrating that Saturday, February 3rd. Has the location been disclosed, or is it still a secret location?
No, I was thinking about that on the walk over here. I was like, I suppose we really, I think we're disclosing it on Saturday. If you bought a ticket, you will receive an email.
This is very covert.
Yeah, it is. It's very covert.
Is it someone's house?
No, it is definitely not somebody's house. I don't think we'd be able to fit that many people in, so no, for sure.
And I love that you're celebrating 5 years. I remember talking to you at the onset of those 5 years.
Yeah.
In hindsight, you look like geniuses for opening this.
Yeah. Some days we
don't
feel like
it. But yeah, that's cool.
It was definitely the right idea at the right time, and you knew that. But what was the risk going into 5 years of pressing records at Smash Plastic?
I don't know. I don't think the risk has ever stopped. Yeah, I mean, I suppose there was. I think in the beginning we knew the idea was so good, so the risk didn't scare us at all. I think the risk comes from every single expansion, and that's where we are again right now. So it's like every time you kind of get a little bit bigger, you think, oh, well, now we got to fill these up, and that's where that risk comes in. But as you stated, I don't know if we're geniuses or not, but the popularity of vinyl hasn't waned at all.
Not at all.
So,
If
yeah.
anything, it's accelerated.
It has. You see it in pop culture everywhere. It's on commercials and movies, and every single time I turn around, I see somebody with a record. And so, yeah, I mean, that part is really good. We are obviously leaning into the wheelhouse of independent music, too. So that also...
Every local band I talk to that has a record out, the first thing they say, oh, yeah, we got this done at Smash Plastic.
Well, that's the idea.
Uh-huh.
That's the idea.
Every local
Yeah.
band.
That's the idea. That's awesome. That's great. And that's always been our first priority, and will always continue to be our first priority, is to take care of everybody here in Chicago.
Looking back on 5 years, what was the biggest surprise?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Every
Every day
day.
is a big
Yeah.
surprise. Yeah. I would say the biggest surprise is now is that the problems don't bother us nearly as much as they used to. I think there were things that totally derailed us, and you're like, well, yeah, I've had that happen to us 1,000 times over. That you kind of go over like a speed bump. So resiliency, I suppose, is some of what I'm talking about.
So you talked about growth, Andy. But how is the pizza?
Good.
Yep.
I've always been a Rosati's fan. We used to get it in Downers Grove when I was a kid.
It's everywhere. Steve, are you eating? Are you?
Oh yeah, I'm eating him.
Okay.
I sat down for a second.
I appreciate
Didn't want to drip the grease all over me.
to engage in the conversation.
Right.
You want to be present. So, talking about growth, right before we started recording, you told me that there's a third press going in. Mm-hmm. Your two press operation. You started with one, right?
We did. We started with one. Just Steve and I ran it for about 9 months, and we learned everything we needed to know about it, and then we just kept expanding from there. And now we've got 3 and 20 some odd employees running the place. So.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And these machines, which are really cool to look at. I mean, for someone like me who isn't in this business, I find it mesmerizing. It's like going to the movies.
Oh, it is.
Watch it. Okay, I'm glad you agree. But it's not like you can go to Costco and get a new record pressing. These are probably very exclusive and hard to get at, or
Well, they're expensive. Yeah, that's one thing. I suppose that goes back to your risk question. Yeah, so that's there is some entry on that, but yes, there's only 2 places in the world that manufacture brand new
Only 2?
machines. Yeah,
Yep.
roughly. I mean, there might be 1 or 2 more. There's some small boutique things here and there, but 2 major manufacturers of brand new machines. And so, yeah, there's been some wait time on that. There's been wait time on everything. I mean, when we started this, we didn't know we were going to hit a worldwide pandemic and then have the supply chain thing go nuts after that. And there's still, especially this build out, it's gone over 2 years. So we've run into so many different supply chain type things over time. When you're buying equipment that requires so many little pieces and parts that go into that piece of equipment, it takes them a very long time to make it, and then to get to us, and then for us to assemble it and get everything that needs to have it happen within the plant. It takes time.
with only 2, maybe 2 companies that make these machines. Talk about a specialty.
Yeah,
It's a weird, wild industry. Yeah.
I mean, you got to figure like less than 10 people in the world know how to put those together.
Yeah. Well, how I can't even begin to tell you how many times Steve's heard me say this a million times when people go like, "Well, what's taking so long?" And I would say, "Well, the company that is assembling this machine is not much bigger than our company, and they
Right.
don't have any pull, and they're trying to get chipboards away from car manufacturers and things like that. I mean, there's a scale to this whole thing, and yes, the record industry is probably towards the bottom of that scale.
So you have roughly 20 employees.
Yeah,
Or accurately 20
Some,
employees.
well, I don't know where our number is.
It's right
but-
about 20.
Yeah.
And when you started, was just the 3 of you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And really, Steve and I full-time, John part-time. Yeah, that was it.
And
for
it
the
was,
most
yeah,
part.
we would take turns pressing. And it'd be like, all right. It was funny because our jobs were, we'd do a 250 job and it'd be like all day. And it would,
250 records.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we'd stop the press to go get lunch and all this. And now
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like the press doesn't stop.
Yeah.
And if we did 250 records in the day, we'd be way behind.
Is that pretty standard, though, for an independent artist to do a 250-piece run or 500?
Yeah, I would say 500 to 1,000 is probably, for a smaller independent band, is probably pretty good, But in brand new bands, 250, sometimes it can take a long time to chew through that at a merch table. So that's why we're still one of the lowest minimums in anyone in the country. So
Why do you think vinyl has accelerated in the way it has?
Well, I mean, that kind of goes back into why we thought it would work in the first place, is that I still think the medium wins in many ways. I mean, obviously people change over time and trends change, but our phone has created this world that we're all kind of waking up to now, right? Like, we're all trying to be, you mentioned, being in the moment earlier, right? We're all trying to be a little more mindful. We're trying to find time for what's quality in our life, because everything else is moving at 300,000 miles per hour. And I think people who are really into music have decided that they don't want their phone delivering that to them all the time. And sometimes you want to take that listening to a different level of pleasure. And that is where vinyl comes in. I mean, that's what that experience is, what it gives you, right? Like, you have to put that record down, you have to put it on. You sit there for 22 minutes and you listen to a side, and then you got to get up and flip it and do it again. And that does slow you down a little bit in this world. And there's enough people who crave that. And I think that's really one of the underlying factors of why vinyl exists today, and hopefully will continue to exist, because we're going to need that to experience music.
I kind of compare what you're describing to getting fast food or cooking at home. Like, every now and then you need fast food is a means to an end. I'll listen to music on my phone when I'm in my car, but when I have the chance, I want to prepare food for myself. I want to put on a record, sit back, and really take it all in.
Exactly. Yep. You just hit the
nail on the head. And then you're listening to it as the artist wanted to lay it out, right?
Yes.
You're listening to a full album. You aren't listening to a shuffle playlist.
Right, you're listening to an artistic vision.
A full album, which it's different.
You mentioned working with independent artists. What is your relationship like with the Chicago musicians, the Chicago music community?
I think it's pretty good. Like you just said, a lot of people are using us. Most of the local labels who have been around for a very long time use us. And we've also, a lot of our great experiences have happened with labels that didn't even exist before we showed up, and now they're doing well and successful. Or some labels that used to be from yesteryear have come back and decided to do vinyl again. And so it comes in so many different sizes, and that's what makes Chicago such a great music scene. I mean, it's not one genre, it's not one style, it's not one era, it's everything. It's constant. So it's just a big machine that we're just happy to be a part of.
Explain for people who don't understand how records are made. How are records made?
Well, give it to them.
So it starts, in the process, we get the music files or tapes.
And they have to be mastered for vinyl,
Mastered for vinyl, because high end, low end, you can't go too high, you can't go too low, you'll get distortion.
So don't try this at home. Get someone professionally mastering your stuff.
Definitely. And then it ends up going to a vinyl mastering engineer who actually has a lathe, and uses and this lathe has a sapphire tipped needle that actually cuts the grooves into what's called a lacquer. The lacquer is 14 inches, looks like a record, but it's completely flat. And so they're cutting grooves into that. That then gets sent to an electroplating plant, which creates the stampers. That is magic. I've seen it. I still don't completely understand it.
And this is why records cost what they cost.
Right.
Like, as you're talking about this process, I mean, this isn't an overnight thing where a band just decides, we're going to make a record. I mean, there are steps, significant steps.
Not to interrupt for 1 second, but we actually have talked about this before, about wondering how many hands hit a record from from the beginning of the recording all the way to the end of our assembly line.
Yeah.
How many hands actually hit it? It's amazing.
And it sounds like you're describing a sword and sorcery movie, like the diamond tip lathe master.
Definitely, it is, and it's then it's they're sprayed with silver, and then the electroplating, the nickel to create the stampers, and so they're super thin, but they're relatively sturdy. And then those get sent to us, and that's the negative of the music. So that's what we put on the press. And then we're heating up PVC that ends up going through what's called an extruder, which is like a screw that kind of heats it up as it goes. And we heat it up to anywhere typically between 255 and 280 degrees, depending on the type of material, the type of music. And then from there, it goes.
What does the type of music have to do with it?
Sometimes you have to, a dance record has the grooves are tighter, so you have to have a bigger puck. You have to maybe get a little hotter, so make sure it fills through those grooves.
Sometimes it'll even stick when grooves are
so
tighter.
There is every bit as much art as there is science to this.
We're constantly playing with it. We're constantly listening to the records as they come off. in adjusting on the fly to make sure the records are sounding better. And we're comparing them back to the test pressing, which I'll get to in a second.
I knew this was a lot of work.
So
it is a lot of work.
I mean, that's why we need 20 people and probably even more. But it is something where you're constantly listening and trying to improve it and make it so we're putting out the best product we can. But yeah, so that then the PVC melts and creates what we call a puck or a biscuit. It looks kind of like a hockey puck. They're engineers that set all these terms, so they aren't really creative. But that hockey puck goes into the press with the labels. A pin comes down, holds it into place, and then it comes under pressure. As it's coming under pressure, those stampers are sitting on what's called a mold. The mold is heated, and so that heats up and that transfers into the stamper. So as the press comes to close, that's pushing out all the PVC and it's staying hot, so it makes sure we are filling in all those grooves. And then
this is like the Moldorama at the museum.
Exactly. There you go.
Similar,
right?
Yeah.
And then
so
just
sound good.
It's kind of like a giant waffle iron in a way, where stuff comes out the sides when you overfill it. So we're making sure we're filling in all those grooves, so some PVC comes out. So after it comes under heat, we cool it. So we run some cool water through to help the molds to help set the record, and then it opens up, transfers it over to our trimming plate, which cuts and makes sure you get that nice smooth edge you get on a record. And we take all of that, any waste we have through this whole process, we can regrind and reuse. So we try to be as environmentally friendly as possible. But then those records, once that side's trimmed, then they can sit to cool overnight, and then we can start packaging them and sending them another way.
And tell me about how you arrive, and maybe you kind of hinted toward it, but how you arrive at the different colors and patterns and all that cool stuff.
Sure. So our presses are automated, so we get a little. We can't get super crazy with our patterns, but in that early process, when we're putting that PVC in, we can Pantone match. We can put in swirls. We can cause some effects into that record when it's getting pressed, and all the dyes and the colors we can make that in that process there.
And when I grew up, when I started buying records, I always had it in my head that if you buy a picture disc, the fidelity isn't as good.
Right.
True.
That's still true?
Yes.
Is that also true with colored vinyl, or is it not?
So, I'll answer it.
Yeah.
The color vinyl thing is very interesting. When we first started, so first place, black is still king. It still melts better than all the other PVC, and that's why it sounds better. But because if you think about it on a microscopic level of where your needle is sitting down within that groove, you want that to be as smooth as it possibly can. Otherwise, you're going to get some hiss and things of that nature. So that's basically 90% of what we're doing at the plant, is trying to make the smoothest vinyl on a microscopic level. Well, when we first started, color was still pretty bad. It still had a lot of that hiss to it, and that's just because of how it melts. As we've progressed over these 5 years, the line I use all the time is there was no research and development in this business forever, and now there's been a ton. So our PVC manufacturer in particular has put a lot of time and effort into how the colors melt. So our color sound has probably, I don't know, what do you say? Probably at least doubled in fidelity since we've started.
Since you started?
Yeah.
Yeah, the improvement is vast.
It's unbelievable, yeah. No, it's not as good as a black sounding record, but it's not as bad as it once sounded. So
it's easier for us to work with. It's amazing how much better it's gotten.
Yeah.
5 years into this, again, you're celebrating your 5th year anniversary this coming weekend as we're recording this. 5 years into this, are you having fun?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's day to day can kill you at times, and nobody wants to rebuild their entire plant and onboard new machines and things like that. That's not part of I look at Steve every once in a while and go, this isn't part of the job. Right? This will go away. But yes, being part of the music scene, throwing a party like we're going to throw this weekend, working with the bands we like, that's the reason you get into it. That's the reason you do it, and to have a really nice record collection at home.
Yeah, and you were talking about kind of the how we fit within the local music scene. Part of what we do is bands pressing a record, they can come in to see the record get pressed, and that's one of my favorite parts is seeing their record get pressed for the first time. A lot of people are walking into a plant for the first time ever, and some people have been pressing records for 20, 30 years and have never seen a record get pressed. So for them to come in and see, we've got hugged, see people cry, high fives. It's cool to see. And the enjoyment people are getting out of it, because it makes the kind of the day-to-day BS that we deal with, a lot easier to take.
Yeah, that's not happening at other factories. I don't think.
Oh, well, and it's this. This is the artist version of what we as fans experience. That having and holding, like seeing their music manifest and made real. It's not this ephemeral thing you can dial up on a phone. This is a hard copy of their labor. I mean, I'm sure it's emotional.
And it's the finish line, too, right?
Yeah.
Like, they started recording that a year and a half before that, or however long they wrote those songs before that. This is the finish line, so I think it does bring out those emotions.
So I do have a lot of independent artists who watch or listen to the podcast. If one of them wants to do a vinyl pressing, is it a long process? Is it?
It's getting shorter. We don't have that exact answer as of today because we want to run these presses for a couple weeks and see where we are. But let's just put it this way to everybody who's listening: like the turnaround time is plummeting for us, and that's a great thing. You know, we were at 9 months for literally ever. Now, we were telling people 9 months and giving it to them in 6 or 7, but it's still...
That's the classic under promise, over deliver.
Certainly. And that was just because it got crazy, and we were like, this is one of the ways we're going to handle this. And now we will have the speed and the capabilities to be able to keep up with any of the demand. So we hope to get down into that, I don't know, 8 to 12 weeks, I would say.
I think that's awesome.
Yeah. And, I mean, under 8 is almost impossible to do because you're just dealing with so many different vendors, as you heard Steve describe. So that's our goal. If we can get to that, I think that would be palatable for everybody in the market, and everyone will be happy, and I think we can keep up, and it'll be a good thing.
I love it. Okay, so for those artists who want to turn to local heroes, Smash Plastic, to make their records, so they just go to your website?
Yeah, that's probably the best way to jump off still. Go to smashplastic.com. Right on the screen, right on the front page, there's a Get a Quote button. You click that. It's a really simple questionnaire, and then once you fill that out, a human will respond to you, and we will take it from there. So it's just a nice, easy jumping off point.
And the reason why it's not an automated answer is because there's so much nuance.
Yes, yeah, there's so much goes into a record. Yeah,
You would have to build the world's craziest algorithm to be able to spit out.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. People ask us all the time, like friends or whatever. So what does it cost to make a record? And it's like, oh my God, like, what do you want to do?
So you have 30 minutes, I'll explain.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Here, listen to this podcast. This will put
Right.
All right. Well, congratulations on 5 years. I'm glad that we could talk about this 5 years after we first met.
Yeah,
Right.
So am I.
You provide such a great resource for our music community. I think this is great.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having us. I mean, we appreciate it, and it takes all the. It honestly does. You know, I get a little geeky about the industry, but it does take. If you want to call it a local industry, everybody's got to kind of take care of each other. So we appreciate you taking care of us and having us on here, and that's how it works.
All right. You know how you can pay me back? Give me another tour when the third one is
You
up and
bet.
running.
Anytime
yeah.
you want. Stop
Okay.
by anytime you want.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
You bet.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, I should mention, since I said it at the beginning of this podcast is now part of the Q101 Podcast Network. I'm calling this a Local 101 interview because I can now.
That's awesome.